City of Stevens Point Historic Preservation Design Review Meeting, recorded November 15, 2022.
Yeah, you can just read out the Okay, we will get started. Got 5:03 on Tuesday, November 15th. And I will give it, in the absence of Chair Siebert, Vice Chair Peter Monk will run this meeting, and I'll give it to you.
All right, so roll call first, right?
Yep,
okay,
start with roll call. And Siebert is absent. Monk?
Here.
Christensen?
Here.
McFarland, just gonna make sure we don't got, okay, I don't see McFarland, he is absent. Scripps is absent. Malipsky?
Here.
And Hornig is excused, and by the thinnest of margins, we got a quorum.
All right. So, so is it motion for?
Read the agenda item.
Okay.
And then a motion.
So, agenda item number 2, report of the October 19th, 2022 meeting of the Historic Preservation / Design Review Commission. Do I have a motion to accept?
I would make that motion.
And I'll second it.
Any discussion?
Pretty straightforward.
All right, with the absence of any discussion, I vote to approve.
All those in favor?
All those in favor to approve the report of the October 19, 2022 meeting of the Historic Preservation Design Review Commission.
Say aye.
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 All right.
And opposed.
And opposed? All right.
It's approved.
We're halfway there.
All right. So, all right. So, we'll go on to to item number 3, a request from Ryan Wanta, representing Great Northern Distillery, for a design review to utilize a paint color not adopted within the Historic Preservation / Design Review Commission's approved color palettes for the property located at 1011 2nd Street.
And before we get to the motion, I'll actually defer to Brian if you wanted to give an overview about the requested paint color.
I'm Brian Cummins. I'm the founder of Great Northern Distilling at 1011 2nd Street. The concern that we have is the barrel room, the block structure at the rear of the new Great Northern that's being constructed right now is a painted masonry structure. And the historic colors, specifically the white colors, are very yellow. And we're looking to match the steel panel color, which was a color that was approved in a previous meeting, the steel panels themselves, to make sure the structure is coherent. So we did get swatches out of all the approved colors, looked at them in daylight and clouds, and it really just was not a match. So there is another Sherwin-Williams color called Fleur de Sel that is a nice match. It's not a garish, super bright white. In fact, the panel color is a little more, rather than a yellow white, it's slightly to the blue side of white. So it matches with the building and will be coherent on the structure. Are there any questions?
I have no questions.
Oh, it sounds like it's probably a much better color from the start.
Oh, absolutely, for matching the structure. Right now, the block is primed, so it looks white as it is, but this will be a much better match.
Right.
And I actually think this color choice kind of actually fulfills the intent of our having a color palette, of making sure it's something that's not really garish, that it's something that's going to fit in well, and this one probably will blend in better with the siding than any of the choices that we do have on the palette. So I think it does meet the intent. So I would be in favor of the exception.
If you want to do a motion.
All right. A motion to approve the request from Ryan Wanta.
I would move approval of the request to
Second.
utilize the color as presented.
Second.
I'll second.
So those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right.
Thank you.
Excellent. Yep.
And I'll be in touch with you tomorrow just with the design review certificate.
Perfect.
And
Awesome. Thank
the
you, Brian.
building's looking nice too, by the way, Brian.
Yeah, it's got a front door now.
Yeah,
Haven't been over there.
It is.
I'm excited.
Hopefully maybe tomorrow if there's not more snow.
Here we go.
Thank you.
Somehow you should control that lot in front of them. Right?
Yeah. All right.
I think something's going to happen there fairly quick. I think something's going to happen there.
Number
So,
4.
on to number 4, discussion on a proposed ordinance preventing demolition by neglect.
All right. So last month when we last met, we've discussed in great detail about the proposed ordinance preventing demolition by neglect, kind of the reasonings behind it, other municipalities in the state who have adopted such an ordinance, really what's its intent, what's the structure of that ordinance. Last month, we had a proposed ordinance brought to you for initial comments, if there were any thoughts, concerns, questions behind it, and there was a pretty good discussion that we've had, and based off of the comments that we received, myself and Attorney Beveridge, we did modify the ordinance. Really the main revisions include the 3 that are shown on page 30 of the agenda packet, which is amending the review criteria that this commission would have to look at in the event that a demolition by neglect ruling is made and it is appealed to this body for review and consideration. So amending the review criteria more so to better align with other sections of the proposed ordinance as well as Chapter 22. Last item with the review criteria, and this was something I know Commissioner Malepsky brought up, is the, quote, any other factor upon which the commission deems pertinent as a review standard. We amended that, added some more detail, really to still retain some flexibility, but really give some meat on the bones as to what you would be looking at if you would want to invoke that review criteria. And then the last one being amending the council review section of this ordinance, basically saying if this commission determines that demolition by neglect on a historic building is occurring, property owner appeals a council, and if during the council meeting council members determine that, hey, we want to kick it back to the commission for reconsideration, for additional review, there has to be a justification, there has to be a reasoning why, not just kick it back to the commission without any instructions. So if there is additional information that the commission would want, there would have to be that requirement included. So yeah, just some more kind of general housekeeping items. Again, there's no official action taken on that would be taken on this proposed ordinance tonight. This is merely just asking the 3 of you, are you comfortable with this? Are you okay with this? And if so, we would proceed forward with notifying folks within the historic and design review districts and then prepare for a public hearing next month. So I guess I'll kick it to the 3 of you if there's any comments, questions, concerns.
I think that at the last meeting, I mentioned something about the difference between the front of the facades downtown of the buildings that, they're so integrated. They're like townhouses in that sense, but they're obviously retail. But as opposed to a residential neighborhood. And I think perhaps I'm the only one that lives in a historic district. And just take an example of the house next to me. okay? It's been a rental for a long time. The one across the street, too, has been a rental forever. And as far as the historical nature of it, and if it contributes to the historic district, historically, if it would probably never be pulled out as something that would be on the National Register, there's no question about that. I guess, where is the line between you got to fix this foundation and maybe I'm going to tear this down? You know what I mean?
As in the property owner
Yes.
tearing it down?
Yes,
Or,
yes, tearing down the house.
well, if,
And that, it's a question. So would we then, if somebody says, no, I'm not going to do these repairs, because I'm thinking in the next 4 years that I might demolish this and put something else here. And so then what would we do in that circumstance?
so in that scenario, if we know what the property owner's intentions are down the road, then that would be a conversation that I would have with them, kind of be upfront with them to say, okay, we know, you have an interest in demolishing this structure in 4 years. That would be an opportunity for me to have a conversation with them saying, these are our demolition guidelines, and at an initial review, would staff be supportive of a potential demolition request or not in support of, and ultimately would the commission be in support? Because commission has the ultimate say so as to if that's going to happen or not. So yeah, I mean, it relates not only to this proposed ordinance, but a lot of other things in historic preservation and planning. Part of the impetus is also knowing future intentions of the property owner to determine how I, as city staff, can help them right now to prepare them for what could happen down the road. So in a case like that, yeah, I would be upfront and say, this is the steps if you'd want to pursue that route. Would I be in support of it, yes or no? And really see where the conversation goes from there.
So the actual demolition, because it's in a historic district, would come before us.
Correct. And I
And
mean,
so then who determines? We determine
Yes.
whether or not that building is
historic.
When in fact it is. It's been remodeled, that there's not much of a historic nature left unless you're going to look at the woodwork on the inside.
and I'm glad I included the whole design guidelines in the packet, but pages
Okay.
89 and 90 of the packet includes the demolition guidelines. So these
Okay.
would be the 11 or so guidelines that this commission would have to review to determine whether or not you would grant demolishing that structure. If any of those criteria, if any of those review standards you believe would not be met, then that would be grounds for you as a commission to say, no, we're going to deny this demolition.
So what page did you say?
89.
I go from 54 to 56 to 107.
It's
89. Looks like this.
It's,
You looking in the bottom right-hand corner?
it's right here.
Yeah.
It's right over there.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I think these.
Okay.
Yeah, it's
over there.
landscape.
Okay, I got it.
View.
Got it.
But yeah, I mean, that would be ultimately, as we talked about last month, ordinance preventing demolition by neglect, that's really the last step. That's providing a buffer, if you will, between requiring improvements to be done on a building and it not falling into a state where it has to be demolished because it's uninhabitable, it's not salvageable.
Right.
So this would really be a conversation where if a property owner would come up to me and say, I want to demolish the structure in 4 years because there are structural concerns, then, if an ordinance like this would be adopted, I would talk about this ordinance and say, before we ever go to a demolition, before we ever go to a demolition review, we would look at this first.
Okay.
Because if an ordinance like this is adopted, honestly, I see very little, if any, demolition requests be brought before this commission for approval, because
Well, that's what you're saying. This
this is really the intent, to circumvent a demolition
Right.
demolition request, so. Any questions, I guess, to start out?
Did I miss something as far as, was there something in the other one that the inspector would go into your house?
The inspector would, so there's legalese involving a city official gaining access into a house for the purposes of an inspection like that. But I mean, ultimately, short answer, that wouldn't happen here. It would be an external review. I mean, if you can see, you know, if it gets to a point where it's pretty noticeable from the public right-of-way that, say, a chimney on the roof is deteriorating to a point where it could crumble at any minute, then we would go through these, send out these non-compliance letters and really start the process.
So was that in there before? It was, right? That
I
there
don't believe it
something
was. I know we talked about it, because I know Attorney Beveridge talked about,
Right, exactly.
you know,
Going in.
the steps that would be needed for that to
Right.
occur.
Right.
But
Particularly if you're looking at it, I mean, there's one thing if it's a safety thing, but there's another thing if, as you're saying, that you're trying to stop minor things before they become major.
yeah, and I'll preface, I believe I mentioned this last time, but, you know, this is not going to be a situation where, you know, should this commission and should council approve of the ordinance, that city staff the next day is going to be going throughout downtown, going throughout Clark Street, trying to find these issues.
Right.
It's going to be very few and far between. I know Mark and I, when we were at the State Historic Preservation Conference a few weeks ago, you know, Madison is kind of a good example as another peer community who has adopted an ordinance like this. They've had 2 demolition by neglect determinations over the last 7 years, and they're significantly larger city, a lot more historic properties, so it's going to be very, very rare that this ever gets invoked. But as the Alder mentioned, this is really adding some meat on the bones to prevent ultimately the worst thing that we want to see as a happen as a commission, and that's
Right.
a historic building being demolished.
Right.
It's kind of a tool of last resort.
Yes.
But what it does do is, since it does we would have this tool in the toolbox, it also increases the likelihood that there would be some common ground found before this would ever have to be implemented, so.
Yeah. Okay. Any other comments? I guess generally, are you comfortable with the ordinance?
I like it.
Yeah.
I think on a trial basis, we should just have it on Carol's property. And then go from there.
Okay.
But, you know, I have to just mention that property values in Madison are much different
Yes.
than
Yes.
the ones here. If
Absolutely.
I was in Madison and my house was sitting in Madison, I mean, it would probably be 4 times what I would get here.
Yep.
Yeah.
I mean, so in that sense, people are much more inclined to keep them up, you know, particularly when, if you're looking at something like Bill Sherrill did downtown in that building, you know,
Yeah.
when the foundation, thus the wall, was an issue. I mean, I guess that's one of the things that I you know, with this kind of, you know, preemptive looking at things, I understand it, but if the previous owner would have still had the property, I don't think he could have repaired it. And I know that we talked about a little bit about a fund.
Yep.
you know, that perhaps there would be particularly, and I think of that more so in the downtown because those buildings are much older, and plus they need the neighbor more than I need my neighbor, you know. So
Yeah, and I'll say, I mean, for the case of Bill, you know, originally he was looking to obtain tax credits as part of the work, but because of the discoveries that took place as a result of the project, you know, he had to, the project wasn't eligible for federal tax credit, so in turn he applied for our facade grant program. You know, that's one tool in the toolbox for financial assistance. You know, I will say there's a lot of other options available that are not provided by the city that could provide financial assistance for property owners. One of the things that comes to mind is the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act that was approved earlier this year. There's a lot of things coming down the pipeline starting, well, EPA and DOE needs to kind of work on the logistics, but likely early next year where there'll be tax credits provided for property owners who wish to, say, swap out appliances for more energy efficiency units. So if you have a furnace that you want to replace, you can swap that out for a newer unit and receive tax credits in return. Some of those project requirements could apply in the case of a historic building for HVAC, mechanical equipment improvements. Ultimately, we don't know what the eligibility requirements are at this time, but that's just one example of, you know, there's something out there where, you know, folks could tap into depending on the rules behind it. So, but yeah, I mean, that was a good discussion that we had, and I know we're going to have some more discussions coming down the pipeline about our facade grant program. So
I think that would be something good to have ironed out of before we ever take it to anybody, where we have like a portion on the website or something like that, where we have a very concrete, like if this is going to be onerous on you financially, here are some concrete areas that you can do to help. And
we do have it's a hidden page, I'll be honest, about financial assistance programs. But yeah, I mean, definitely, you know, I'll admit we can do a better job with educating and doing some public outreach as to the assistance programs that are offered by the city and then through the state level, federally. So
I think that's going to be crucial when it comes to something like this, where there's some potential teeth added to this, where people can go.
Okay. Awesome. So I guess maybe just for a heads up, I'll be planning then the week of the 12th sometime, not that Monday, because we've got committee meetings Monday night, December 12th, but December 13th, 14th, or 15th, that's likely going to be one of the days where we will meet next, where we'll hold a public hearing for this proposed ordinance and then see what the commission's wishes are then. Likely later this week or early next week is when I'll be sending out the notification letters to everybody downtown in the Clark Street Historic District, Design Review District. So, I mean, Alder Christensen, maybe just an FYI on your part. But yeah, everybody will be notified. So if you get any questions from folks, you know, feel free to refer them to me in the interim.
And I think, and this relates to this, plus the other, I certainly know when you get a notice and it's just 10 days, it's not much time.
Yeah.
Because first of all, in a 10-day period, you may already have made some plans for that 10-day. But if you want to get your neighbors together, you know, obviously, they have things going on. 10 days is really a short period of time.
It would be a lot more than 10 days. So there's.
But I think that was in one of the other parts, when I was reading through this, it said 10 days or something like that, and specifically, I don't know where that was. I'm sure I made a note on it somewhere here.
The other thing that's come into play, because we just had a situation where the city sent out certified letters to everybody impacted, to property owners, and when we're looking at creating the bid, and you're required by statute, a business improvement district, and you're required by statute to send out certified letters. We did it, the meeting was going to be on a Monday night. We did it the Thursday, not the preceding Thursday, but the Thursday before that, and we still had certified letters that hadn't been delivered. I mean, so with mail, with the difficulty that they're having with getting carriers and everything else, mail service, you almost have to
That's true.
put things out earlier than what you anticipate, because and during that stretch of time, you're going to start getting into your Christmas cards, and the delay could be even greater. So that is something to be mindful of. Yes.
Right. That's a good point.
For
better earlier than late.
promise not to get too deep in the weeds here, but I mean, as far as the public hearing notice is concerned, that would be in the papers on the 25th and the 22nd, the 25th of November, the 2nd of December, and through state statutes, you're required to have at least 1 week separation from the second notice to when the meeting will be held. For any public hearings where I send out these notification letters, they're sent out and they're delivered to the property owners at or before that first week where it's posted in the notice. So it's a holiday next week, so it's going to be a little bit goofy, but I'd say midweek next week, folks should be getting the letter from me saying, hey, this is coming down the pipeline.
Sounds good.
But I have to tell you, I mean, I've had weeks of late that I don't get mail 2 days. And I know the mail is here because I get that USPS notice on my phone what mail I would be getting that day. So the mail is here, but the mail isn't. So.
Yeah. They are running shorthanded.
They are.
It's
terrible.
Yep.
Perfect.
But that sounds good. Thanks, Adam.
Yeah. Okay, if you want to go to the
All right. Now, item number 5, discussion on a historic plaque program.
Okay. So I want to begin by talking about, what's the purpose behind a historic plaque program. And the general intent here, as you see on the screen, is to provide an inexpensive and tactful means to bring awareness of the historic and architectural significance of a site through the use of consistent recognition plaques. And the word consistent is really the key word there. Folks who own a building downtown, who own a house within the Clark Street district, if they want to showcase the historic nature of their building, if they want to, there should be some sort of consistency as to what type of display would be shown on the building. And I've been approached by a fair number of property owners downtown requesting a type of program like this. So that's really what spurred me looking into how other communities have adopted a plaque program and how that could be translated into our own plaque program. So what is typically on a recognition plaque? Now, there's a lot of details that could be discussed, that could be included as a plaque, but generally speaking, for what other communities have had included on their plaques, the historic district that building is located in, if there's a name associated with the structure, that would be on there, the year that building was constructed, and then potentially some key figures tied to the building. If there's a famous architect of the building, a famous person who resided in the building at one point. So this is included in the packet as well, but here's just some general examples from other communities here in the state as to their plaques that they have adopted. You know, have Oshkosh, Whitefish Bay, Milwaukee. So the purpose of this meeting, actually before I get to that, I want to talk a little bit about the approval process, really the steps to follow should somebody want to install a plaque on their building. So first off, they submit an application, and I've included a copy of Oshkosh's plaque application just to give some context as to the level of information that city staff and you as a commission would be looking at, and that's on pages 41 through 47 of the packet. So once the application is submitted, city staff would review it, meet with the applicant, really to ensure accuracy in the information that was included on the application. Once we get to a point where accuracy is verified, that request is brought before the Historic Preservation Commission, the Landmarks Commission for their consideration, and if that commission would approve, the applicant would submit payment to the city for the plaque. Now, this is something where in other communities, it's the individual property owner who would pay for the plaque. This isn't something where the municipality would fork the bill, so to speak, for the plaque, and that's generally something that I would agree with too, should the commission want to pursue a similar program. City staff provides a signed vendor with the approved plaque rendering for manufacturing, plaques manufactured, installed on the building, and then city staff conducts the final inspection of the plaque. So really the purpose of this meeting here is to just generally first answer any questions about really what's the purpose of the plaque program, and then solicit input. Is this something that is of interest here in the city that you would want city staff to pursue further, yes or no? And you know, if yes, then the next few months would really go into the details as to what would be displayed on the plaque, what would be the shape of the plaque. Would it be more oval, circular, kind of a odd shape, so to speak, like Milwaukee's? The color, what type of material would it be, where would it be located on the building? So that's the level of detail we don't need to get into today, but again, just generally looking to see, is there an interest amongst the three of you in city staff pursuing this further and then ultimately going forward with a program like this?
Yes.
Yeah. And I've also had business owners approach me and indicate an interest, so I think it's definitely something we should move ahead with.
And there's a great educational value to it as well. I know that that there is a course at SPASH, and a part of that course, I believe it's still an activity where they actually go downtown, and it's like they do it like a scavenger hunt or something like that. And so I think that's still being done, but yeah, it's it could be good from an educational point of view. So I think there's an educational value to it, and then there's also, you know, the advertising value of people coming in and looking around, and yeah.
I think identification as well. I know obviously the city is working with Convention Visitors Bureau as part of a wayfinding signage, but having a plaque program would provide means of better identifying. You're now in a historic district. You know, this building in particular has historic value. Yes, you may surmise by looking at a building that, you know, it's older, it has some architectural details. You might assume that it's a historic building, but not necessarily know for certain or correlate that to really the goals and objectives of this commission.
Yeah,
so.
And I think that further information gets, I think people are more invested in it.
Yeah.
So, for instance, when I lived for a short time in London, there's plaques everywhere where it's like, you know, such and such person lived here. And I said, okay. I would have just passed by that building and not really had any kind of second thought about it, any care about it. But now that I know that, oh, that person is there or that happened, I care about it more.
I think that this is really much more adaptable to the downtown because it's obviously right next to the sidewalk. So on particular houses, you know, if somebody was going to actually read it, they'd have to walk up your front walk, which I would like to see, and I'm not sure whether that plaque that's on the square gives any information about, it tells about the people that were involved in redoing the square. Does it say the Matthias Mitchell Square on that plaque? I know it has names.
I would lean towards yes, but I'm not.
It does.
I'm not.
Does it?
I'm not positive.
I think so.
I feel
And I'm
like
not sure it
does.
has a year on it.
The year as in when the
When the square was
district
actually, no, when the square was actually initiated. Obviously, you know, they had the date of the year of the renovation, but I'm not sure whether or not it has the, you know, when the configuration of this, when the square began.
Well, and I'm not sure too if that sign was installed by the city or if that was
Yes,
installed
it
as
was.
part of as like the State Historical Society.
Yeah, I think it was done right with, because there's people that were on the committee.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they do have a, like 2011 Matthias Mitchell
Right.
Public Square
Okay.
reconstruction.
Right. But it,
And then there's the other side where it has Public Square and it gives the
it does, huh?
history
Okay,
of.
that's good.
Yeah.
Okay, the other thing that I was going to mention is, okay, the other thing that I was going to mention, and I just didn't recall what was on there other than the committee thing, but the other thing, if you drive around Madison, you see that they have signs for neighborhoods. So it would, you know, as far as I'm concerned, particularly in the residential neighborhoods, I would like to see the city put together, there's, on the tax forms or wherever I see it, you know, it'll say the Boynton subdivision, which I think I'm in, but it gives all those, I mean, all those names, McCulloch, you know, the names of the streets, and are all those personages that probably were involved in that edition of the subdivision. And places like out back here, that was always known as City Park. And some of those names are beginning to be lost. Somebody doesn't know what City Park is, but that was City Park out there, you know, and it was probably because this was a park. You know, they had trotters here, you know, and maybe that's what happened then after that. I don't know that it was called because it was next to a park, I don't know. But it would be interesting, I think, as far as neighborhoods, because you probably wouldn't walk up to somebody's door. I mean, that's a more individual thing, but I think, you know, certainly for the Clark Street Historic District and perhaps even the downtown, that there is a sign designated as a historic district, because I think, as Peter said, I think that you just look a little closer then.
Yeah, specifically with the neighborhoods, the sign identifying you're now in the Matthias Mitchell Public Square District. No, that's something I would defer to our work that will be ongoing in the next few months as part of our wayfinding sign, our wayfinding signage plan and implementation. Just my assumption is many of those items that you just raised would be incorporated into that. That would kind of fall within that scope outside of this commission's scope and specifically the plaque program. But yeah, I think, you know, if we want to look at a plaque program like this in the next few months, having a conversation about should this plaque program apply to all historic districts, design review district, or apply to only some? I mean, that's a reasonable conversation to have. You know, I do understand it would be a little bit trickier in terms of the placement of the sign if this plaque program would also apply to Clark Street Historic District. You know, placing it in a way that is still aesthetically pleasing, plus, as you mentioned, is still clearly visible from the sidewalk. So, I mean, but yeah, I mean, that's definitely a conversation we can have in the next few months to see where this would be eligible for.
Because obviously there's houses that are not in historic districts that could well have one of these.
If there's any local landmarks, properties that were approved as a local landmark, you know, it would be within your right to say, yes, those properties would also be subject to this.
And there are different types of historical districts in the city as well, so
Yes.
we have to determine whether they get treated differently or the same, or how you differentiate or not differentiate.
Yeah, I think that's, like I said, that's a reasonable conversation to have, and honestly, I don't have an opinion one way or the other. I think there's a reasonable argument that can be made to say, don't apply this to Clark Street, maybe even portions of Design Review District as well. But ultimately it would be your call, so we can have that conversation in the next few months.
I don't quite understand why you wouldn't have that in the residential neighborhood,
I mean, I'm looking more so about,
the downtown.
well, no, more so placement of the sign to make sure that, I just feel like for a plaque, it would be easier to install on a commercial building downtown than it would be
Certainly.
on a residence.
Right.
Can it be done? Possibly. I guess I haven't looked at that further to see, is it still going to be aesthetically pleasing and and still meet the design guidelines in here for residential uses?
We could put a bronze plate in the concrete.
But if you want to see an example too, there is, just before you get to the welcome to downtown
Yes.
sign, that we do have a house with a historical plaque on it, and so you can kind of see what it looks like. You get some idea of how easily read it is. It also varies, you know, our house is set back much, much further than almost any of the houses along our section of Clark Street. So one, for the vast majority, where you would put a certain size plaque, it would probably pretty easy to read for the majority of the houses because they're built pretty close to the sidewalk.
Yeah.
Ours is back a long ways. I don't think we could put a big enough plaque for somebody to be able to read what was on it.
In the case of Milwaukee's, the lower left-hand corner here, yeah, there's no way that you could see that with all the.
Yeah.
That's personally, that's a
Too
lot.
much
That's a lot of.
verbiage.
That's a lot of
man.
words, but not sure why they went that route, but.
Well, if it's
For
close enough,
another day.
you're able to get a lot of information. That's kind of nice.
Yeah.
One thing I see is this being beneficial for is it'd be nice if you get walking tours developed and people would be able to follow along and know where they're at and know they're looking, that when you're hearing us about a certain house that it's placed, there's places now that you can access it via your phone or whatever, and you can just go along and get really, I think, a lot of information disseminated, and you know that what you're hearing is actually about the building that you're looking at. So it'd be kind of nice as a marker for that process as well.
I like that you mentioned that, because that's a perfect segue to one of our staff updates.
Yep, I saw that.
But awesome. Any other comments? Otherwise, I'll start working on having some discussions, maybe not December, but likely January, where we can kind of get into the details about what are the different design options. I know, Mark, I sent you something earlier today from Milwaukee showing probably dozen and a half, 2 dozen different design options that they've had to consider. So there's a lot there. So again, this is probably going to be a couple month process, but hopefully mid 2023 we can have something adopted. So
There's just one other comment. In the mid-'80s, the HPDR did give out a certificate with the name of the house on and the year it was built, to various houses across the city.
I mean, we have a design review certificate that we give folks they get a design review approval, like Great Northern Distilling earlier today. But yeah, we could create something different. I kind of like that.
Right. They were given out, and somebody did the nice lettering on them, so they looked,
Fancy.
individual.
Okay. Awesome. Okay.
Move on to discussion item, move on to 6 for discussion on the Historic Preservation / Design Review Commission's design guidelines. Question is, where are we now?
All right, so this is going to be the kickoff meeting of likely many meetings to come. Taking a look at our design guidelines as they stand right now, and ultimately the end goal being what works well with our design guidelines, what does not work well, and what types of modifications should be done to that. So you mentioned a little bit of some background information in the agenda packet. So about a decade ago now is when the commission approved our current iteration of our design guidelines. Unfortunately, this is really against any planning process that you hear from folks, is we haven't really evaluated the effects of these changes since 2012, since 2013. And I've talked with a few of you over the last few months about our design guidelines, but ultimately my perspective is it's 10 years since when we last adopted our guidelines. Now's a good time to take a look at it and see really what I mentioned before, if there's any revisions that should be made to it. So in terms of the schedule, in terms of how we're going to go about this, one of the means that I've found work quite well for more of these long-term, larger scale planning initiatives would be a concept of visioning, where there's 5 different steps associated with visioning, and that's included in the packet right now, in the packet as well. Number 1 being where are we right now, where are we going, where do we want to be, how do we get there, and are we getting there? So within each of these 5, there's the bullet point kind of outlining what would be looked at, what would we be reviewing in the context of each of those questions. So I won't get into too much detail about the first one, of course, but since we're going to be talking more about that in a little bit. But so the first one really being, what are our shared values? What do we want to see as in terms of preservation planning to carry forward in the next 5, 10 plus years? Where are we going? So looking at really the current assessment of where things are right now in the city. Are there certain characteristics that you see downtown? The example that came to mind right off the bat is, over the last 5, 10 years, you've seen a lot more of triangular awnings that's been installed on buildings downtown. What are the reasonings behind that? One can assume that's wanting to reactivate the storefront by installing those signs, that you want to bring out the use of that building from not only in the building but also into the sidewalk as well. So in a status quo environment, what are some conclusions that can be made as to what would happen in the future if all else stays the same? Number 3, where do we want to be? And this is really the meat of what we would be talking about in the context of our design guidelines. Looking at, what are preferred scenarios? What are we looking to achieve? What is our vision with respect to preservation planning, and more specifically, the types of improvements that are done to buildings in a historic and design review district? How do we get there? That's really going to get into specific policy recommendations, code revisions that we can incorporate into a potential rewrite, or not rewrite, amendment. And then number 5, this is the one that we've neglected to do over the last 10 years, but really evaluate, establish some benchmarks, and see, really, are we meeting it? So we want to start out with number 1, with where we at right now. And to kick it off, the first question that I have for you all, and this is an open-ended discussion, there's no wrong answer. This is really more of a collaborative discussion amongst the 4 of us here, is really, why do we focus on preservation planning? You know, what's the intent here with preservation planning? There's no wrong answer. I just, not trying to trick you here, but what are some of the things that come to mind when you think of preservation planning, when you think of really the goal and intentions of this commission?
I think of it as recognizing where we came from.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I look at it as historic buildings being a public treasure, that it's something that the community as a whole values and benefits from. And so part of our undertaking is to make sure that the community will still have access to those things in the future as well. That it's not just a value to the property owner, but it also is important to the community in its entirety.
Okay.
I think it creates a sense of space, a sense of place, you know, that is really important. And obviously, because I've lived here so long, I remember so many buildings. That I remember the Carnegie Library that went down, I remember the courthouse that went down, I remember the old post office that went down, and even more recently where the BMO Bank downtown is, it was the Elks, it was the Mason.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was the Mason building. Penny's was not a loss, or the National Food Store, that wasn't a loss as far as I was concerned. But I remember the buildings, but it's very different remembering them compared to looking at a postcard or a picture of them, because I know the three-dimensional of it, you know, and if you don't have that, all you have are pictures. And pictures are very different than the actual physical presence of those buildings.
And that's a good, I like that you mentioned that specifically, the, you know, pictures being one means to remember the past, but not being the sole and arguably not an effective means of remembering the past. I guess, are there other, outside of photographs, outside of pictures, are there other means of remembrance that you can think of that the public can see, can view, to look at the historic buildings that you just mentioned that are now no longer here? Yeah. Is there, I guess what I'm getting at is there a lack of data, of information as to these old buildings that are no longer here? Or is it a case where we have the information, we have the data, not really a great word, but it's just not readily available to the public?
Are there videos, like old videos of downtown or anything like that? Or like,
I know down in the library there are.
Right.
okay, because other than pictures, I think that's like the only other one, maybe like different, what was that one that's there's obviously there's the insurance thing that happened way back in the day, where they kind of mapped out the different, never mind, maybe I'm remembering something wrong, but yeah, I think that we do here is kind of like, it's kind of like an overseer, like a steward of this town and of the historic nature of the town.
I would love to see oral histories
Yes.
gathered and shared of each of these places, because people like you have.
Checking out.
Well, but it's true. I mean, to be able to get the stories from the people that saw it and lived it and could share it. So, you know, I would love to have something set up like kind of I mentioned before. We could go on a walking tour, and you get to a certain spot. And, you know, it's, you know, now go 20, 50 feet ahead until you see such and such a spot. And you could have even markers along the way, and they could say, this used to be the site of
And that's
the
what I'm just
Carnegie
thinking, maybe
Library.
that's the plaque. The
And
plaque on the side
so-
of the building, and that right here, the parking lot here was the Carnegie Library.
Yeah.
Okay.
You know, something like that. I would love to have something like that would be accessible to kids. As a kid, I was a history nut, and so I mean, I volunteered at the local museum. I had a key to the museum. I would conduct tours myself, and so, you know, but I loved having the old timers. Now that I'm an old timer, having them come in and share stories. I mean, what a font of knowledge each one, and if we could gather all of that up and make it accessible and share it with more people, I think that to me would be huge.
I think, yeah, and it could do that as like a podcast series of this sort of thing, where it's like, the podcast, and then you also have like a playlist where it's like, play number 2 for this, and then you put it in your phone or something like that, and then.
So there's still an interest in what's occurring or what occurred in the past, but in terms of current assessment of conditions, there's maybe fear is too strong of a word, but that in maintaining the status quo, that over time that information is going to be lost just with age, with passing. That is there a way that we can lock that information somewhere?
And I love, that's why I love seeing those projects where somebody collects all those oral histories before they fade away. I mean, it's that.
There are a lot of postcards of Stevens Point, and I think they're over at the university. I have quite a few, but the university has the collection of my neighbor down the street, John Anderson, and you could conceivably blow some of those up a little bit and then put UV plexi over them or something, so they won't completely fade out, because one of those photos is a photo of the actual thing, as opposed to doing some kind of plaque that has it engraved in or, photoed on it, those new kind of processes. An actual photo of it, I think, has more impact.
Okay.
I also think, like I mentioned, like video archives, some way to digitize that and make them more available.
Right.
Okay.
Like YouTube or something like that.
Okay. Next question, going more towards our design guidelines here. Looking at our shared values, why do we regulate improvements that are done on historic buildings? What's the purpose? I mean, again, there's no right or wrong answer. It's just to kind of have a 30,000-foot view before we start honing in on specific improvements to building features.
Like I said, the Stewart issue, where it's like to keep them historic in the way that prevents somebody to just completely erase what it is, because architecture and what a storefront looks like has memory, has history, has all those emotions, and there's a value in that, and defending that value from putting in something that doesn't have very much, if any, value for the fact that it's just what's in fashion now.
Mm-hmm.
And following up on that, on what's in fashion now, I have to tell you, early on, when I was on HPDR way back in the 80s, the building that's on the corner of Strong's Avenue and Main Street, okay, across from the Savlaki place. On the front of that building, they were going to put these stones, and they kind of look like fake stones with black mortar over the brick. So that is why.
That's something.
Yeah, it was just horrible. Anyway, but that sort of thing just doesn't respect the building.
Yeah.
You know, and that's what these guidelines are about, that somebody doesn't close up a second-story window and, you know, just not respect the fact that there was a window there. And I know on some of the buildings downtown, they wanted to close up those upstairs windows, and then we at least had them way back when put some kind of frame that looks like there's a shade pulled down, you know, but the window is still there. Or the circumstance where somebody is going to just remove the window or put a new one because that was the one they had in their basement and it was triangular, so that when you look at that building, you just see that triangular window. You know, it has no cohesiveness with the rest of the building. And I think that that's what these guidelines are supposed to guide you through, that what you're doing with the building is cohesive with the building and respecting it for what it started like. I would like to see, I mean, if something else is built, I don't like the idea of putting in a building that looks just like the one next to it, just because, you know, kind of Swissification and all that kind of stuff, you know, make it look like the other ones, make it look old, keep the, you know, there's a building down in Madison again. They tore the whole thing down, and they kept the columns and the top of that piece of the front entrance, and it's just standing there by itself, and it looks stupid. You know, it's not connected to anything. It wasn't supposed to be like that. You know, it didn't respect it. I mean, it was a beautiful entrance, you know, but you destroyed it even though it's still standing there. And I think that that's what we're trying to do, keep it intact in a way that's respectful.
Okay. Mark?
It goes back to my earlier thought, you know, that those historical buildings are of value to the entire community, and we want to be able to maintain that value, that it's not just of value to that property owner, but it's also important to the community as a whole.
Okay. Next question. So one of the functions of this commission, preservation planning, broadly speaking, is establishing historic districts. This may seem like an open-ended question, but why are there buildings that are congregated into, why are buildings congregated into a broader historic district? You know, what's the purpose of establishing a district? What's the argument for establishing, to have a pool of buildings codified under one district boundary? Not meant to be a brain stumper here.
No, I think it's the same thing as if you're thinking of the downtown, that you're respecting the neighborhood, the sense of place. You know, that oftentimes a lot of the buildings were built kind of at the same time, or there was a spurt of development as time went on. And sometimes it indicates, certainly on Clark Street, that the sewer line ended at Fremont. You know, so then after that, I mean, some of the older places, you know, like right down the street, which you just approved at the Boston House there, you know, I mean, that was along with their Caisson building on the side there, the barn that they have. It is kind of putting a time frame on that segment, just like you would with the downtown, and you're trying to respect that that heritage.
Okay. Next couple of questions are going to relate more to the current assessment of conditions. So what elements, both good and bad, do you see of preservation planning that's within downtown? So if you walk along Main Street, what are some examples, what are some elements of preservation planning that you see? Again, it can be both good examples, it could be some not so good examples. Just what are some things that come to mind when you just imagine walking down Main Street? You know, you have this sense that you're in a historic district. What are some of the elements? What are some of the first things that come to mind that lets you know, yes, I have to be in a historic district?
I do like the sign, the signage and of downtown of the square, and the guidelines generally dictating or codifying a way to kind of, for businesses to represent themselves in a way that's respectful to what's been done in the past, so that so you're not putting like a Vegas like facade on something. There's ways to go about making your facade in a way that you can definitely see that, okay, it's respectful of the past. And one thing I'm enjoying from this past year is some of the facades going back to what they used to be, like the one that's across from I think it's like Rose House, like used to be like Kristen's Riverwalk, now like going back to like the original front instead of the 80s the thing that they have going on right now, and the Fox Theater going back to kind of more of its roots, and so I'm enjoying that.
So more of the kind of loosely termed storefront activation, looking at the signage, looking at the streetscape, the street environment.
Yes.
That look, that feel is different when you're walking along Clark Street, that lends yourself to know I'm walking in a historic district.
Yeah, it's definitely different walking down there than walking, say, past, District 1 and that area, or that sort of thing, or down Highway 10,
Definitely. Okay. Carol or Mark, anything else to
Yeah, I
add?
think some of the buildings that are down there, the renovation on the front, particularly Bill's Pizza, was done before the historic district was incorporated, and that was mainly, when was that? It was in 1983 or something like that, 1981, in order to get some money, right, for a TIF district or something.
Yeah.
And the mall.
And
Went
the
up
mall.
pretty much the same time as the mall. That the downtown had to be evaluated to get the monies. But I think, the outcome of that was just really good. I think the other thing that I really liked and we really pushed for was keeping the library downtown.
Yes.
And integrating it in. And obviously, that's a newer building in there, and it's set back from the line of the rest of the buildings. But I think that that's fine. But I like the fact that they integrated the Cool building on the corner as well as a couple other buildings on the side. I think they're having problems with it, though, right? some issues.
Yeah.
But they're old buildings, you know. But I think that was a really good use of those buildings, and they didn't destroy the integrity of the outside of the building at all, and they were well used on the inside. So I think that library integrated into that was a really big success, plus the fact that it stayed downtown. And I think that, I certainly know that at the time, there were a lot of people that really pushed forward because they were thinking of putting it down near McKinley School. And, you know, what you want in a small town like Point is to keep as many kinds of things downtown, including what's going to, you know, hopefully the courthouse will stay downtown, because that's how you keep people downtown. You have people come downtown for a reason, and those are staples that, you know, are ongoing.
For me, the biggest difference between downtown and any other part of Stevens Point is, as you're walking, you don't just look sideways, you look up, because the facade, I mean, they're not single stories, they're multiple story, and you take a look at the architecture and the features and all the details that are up there. Maybe I'm easily impressed, but I just want, I mean, it's artwork. I mean, it's incredible. And nowadays when you see new construction, it doesn't improve the function of the building at all, but they took the time. It's kind of those days of, you know, it's kind of the good old days maybe, where it wasn't just function, it was also form, and it was the aesthetics, and so you had all of those details up there. I love, I mean, we go on walks there quite often, but I mean, and it seems like every time I go, I see another detail that I didn't notice before. And when you're walking with an architect, she finds things that I wouldn't have. I mean, she notices a lot of details, but that's to me what makes it special.
And I think one thing we've talked about, especially you, Commissioner Malewski, over the last year, I don't know if I would necessarily put this as a bad element, but we definitely are improving, and that's having a greater focus on the rear of the buildings, especially if there's any facade grant funds that are being reviewed at, or if there's just any project nonetheless. I mean, naturally, if there's any projects, any improvements done on a historic building, a greater focus is done on the storefront, on the front of the building. But we should still have a similar degree of care for the rear of the buildings as well, especially like on the north side of Main Street within the downtown. You can see all the rear of all those buildings because it's parking lot behind there. So there's still an emphasis that can be done, that should be done, that I think would be reasonable to look at in our design guidelines to see if there's some stuff lacking.
And I think that's actually included in one of the plans that the city's adopted too, to put an increased emphasis on the rear of the buildings, because I know that's something that council in their discussions has taken into account and used as part of their decision-making process. So.
Okay.
And the backs of those buildings weren't visible before.
Yeah, because with the mall.
Right, exactly. They
very-
weren't visible. And the same thing, you know, on behind the library there. Obviously, the majority of the people come in from that south side into the library. So that facade all the way up to the music store, which used to be a bank, you know, that entrance too had been improved because people were coming in from the back of the bank. And then the next building, the old Woolworths building, I think is cleaned up, but I don't think that's necessarily a public entrance like the front of it is.
And remind me again, what year was the mall demolished?
It was demolished. What year was it demolished?
Yeah. I mean, it's been vacant
Early
for...
2010s or something?
I'm just trying to think, because I feel like it was around that early teens that, honestly, when we went through the last iteration of reviewing our design guidelines, it could still have been at a time when the mall was still up, that there wasn't as much emphasis.
It seems to me it was there for 25 years, 20 years, 30 years, 25 to 30 years it was, I think.
Okay.
1983, I think. So that would be what?
2013.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Around then.
13, right? Maybe
That's 30.
2010.
Actually good. I'm going to make a note of that. Rear elevations and the mall.
Yeah.
So same question, but for Clark Street. So if you're walking down Clark Street and you're within the Clark Street Historic District, say you're a visitor of Stevens Point, what are some features, what are some elements that you can see that lets you know, I'm walking in a historic district without actually knowing it?
A sign.
Sign.
A sign recognizing that it is. For all the hoops you have to jump through, let's at least have the city recognize it as a historic district.
So outside of, I guess, what we should do, are there certain features of these residences that would lend oneself to believe that it is a historic building, that there is a historic element associated with this?
I would say the consistency of it, where it's like you have a building that's of one architectural design, pedagogy, whatever, and then you don't have like a addition that's different. There's a continuity to it that I see.
I think one thing I've noticed, and granted, I mean, non-historic homes can still have this as well, but more of the open air porches.
Yep.
Particularly along the front of the buildings, within the front of the buildings, that, again, you see that in other homes, not in a historic district, but I feel like that's a common trait that you see in residential historic districts.
Right.
Not solely looking at Stevens Point, where that's a common characteristic.
Well, there was no air conditioning.
Can't even imagine
That's
that.
what the porch was about.
Yeah. Okay. Any other kind of thoughts that come to mind?
No.
Okay. I guess one last open-ended question.
Actually, just back up a second.
Sure.
I would hope that in the historic district, that, again, similar to if new construction would have to be put in someplace downtown, that I would like it to have some nod to the neighbor, but I would also like to see something that speaks to the time it was built, which may well mean materials.
But I think the project that we dealt with earlier tonight is kind of an example of doing just that, because when they designed the distillery, they a lot of the lines and a lot of the form and stuff was based upon the Bilkey lumber building that was there prior to. But some of it kind of combined some of those same type of lines, but with different materials that made it modern. So I think it was a very nice blend of still kind of paying homage to what was there prior, but still demonstrating when it was actually being built too. So I think.
And I think that, I mean, it would be difficult to codify that in a design guideline saying whatever building used to stand here, any new building has to closely complement it. But there still are ways to kind of address that without directly addressing that. Specifically our massing, scaling, bulk standards for buildings. You know, that's a way of kind of addressing just that. If you have, say, the Belkey lumber, for example, I mean, that was a tall, I think that was still a 2-story structure.
Pretty much.
That any new building that's on that site should be of a comparable height, preferably 2 stories in height as well.
On the building next door is, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, and then last question, and again, going at the current assessment of conditions, is open-ended question. Don't really need a whole lot of detail, just kind of Spark Notes version of your current assessment of our design guidelines. Is it good? Is it not so good? Are there specific areas that comes to mind that you say there needs some attention?
Right. And I think it's materials. It's materials.
I can agree with
Yeah.
that.
Okay. Mark, if there's anything?
No.
Okay.
And I'm not, I don't know specifically, and I haven't looked at the colors that are recommended. I don't know if they're Sherwin-Williams historic colors. I mean, I really think of those as being more the 1800s or something like that, and I don't live in an 1800s house.
Yeah.
So I haven't looked at the colors that closely that you've put on there. And I guess the next question that comes with that is, if we review these and we change these, and so we're changing the requirements for people living in historic districts, will there be a public hearing?
Public hearing's not required, but we can, if it's of the commission's wishes, to send the notification letters directly to them. It was my intention, it is still my intention, that before we ever get to a point of possibly adopting changes to this, that we would have some sort of, I don't know if it's necessarily a public meeting, but solicitation of input amongst these stakeholders to see, hey, we know you're aware of our design guidelines, these are some of the changes that we're looking at doing, what's your thoughts? And then pick their brains a little bit and then reassess as a commission. So public hearing's not required, but yes, there definitely will be public input gathered, and how much public input would ultimately be up to you all as a commission.
Because I know I've mentioned this before, but the changes that you did in 2014, which required paint colors and a lot of material kinds of things, I never knew about it.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's good. So if there are, even because, you know, obviously I was told that I wouldn't have to go by those guidelines because I wasn't informed.
And I think,
You know, so because that wasn't done in 2014, I think it's imperative that we do it now. If this changes to any amount, or I think we should just do it, because there were quite a few changes. And, I mean, obviously, you know, are you in the district?
In a district, but a different type of district,
Okay.
yes.
So, but yeah, people have to be informed.
yeah, there's definitely many different ways that we can provide that information to the public.
And, you know, the one presenter that we saw too, he actually isn't a strong proponent of utilizing only the historical palette, and partially, probably for the reason that you just indicated. There's buildings located within the historical district that aren't of a time frame where that historical palette
Right.
is actually accurate. And so there may be some discussion of whether we're best served by having a specific palette approved, or whether we should just ask them to present it. I do think it's in our best interest not to have bright orange buildings on downtown. My poor son had his neighbor paint his entire house of this fluorescent, not quite fluorescent, it's my God, because that's what his daughter wanted. That's her favorite color, and it's god awful. But that being said, I don't know. I mean, the color that was presented tonight, to me, was perfectly, was a very good choice. I don't know that we have to be quite as restrictive as we are, so that may be a conversation in of itself.
Right,
The
and
other-
materials, and the materials
yeah.
part, yeah.
The other thing that we may want to consider too is we might want to take a look at the targeted master plan that's been developed for downtown and just make sure that what we're doing is also consistent with that, because it's not, and there are a lot of common themes that from what I recall, but I think that would also be helpful as part of our process too, as we're going through guidelines, just to make sure we have that consistency and continuity.
For sure, for sure. I know that's, specifically with the public outreach, I know this is something that I think the mayor mentioned both to myself and you, Mark, about, periodically providing updates to council as to some projects, some initiatives that the commission has been working on.
Yep.
If, case in point, the demo by neglect discussion, I mean, that's, I know it's kind of coming down the pipeline
Preventing
sooner.
demolition by
Preventing
neglect.
demolition by neglect. Thank you.
I do like that change.
I changed that right for the title. It has a whole
Yes,
new
you
title
did.
now. But yeah, I mean, I think there's definitely a lot of ways of soliciting public input, and that's definitely something we can take into account.
Good.
But awesome. Appreciate the discussion. Again, I thought this was a pretty insightful conversation, looking more at that 30,000-foot view level. And then as we proceed in the months ahead, we'll focus more on kind of the streetscape environment and honing in on our design guidelines specifically. So, Chair, I guess I'll turn it back to you.
All right, so moving on to the staff update on the online story tour of historic buildings in downtown Stevens Point and the establishing guidelines for painting murals.
Yes. So the first one with the walking tour. So one thing that I'm hoping it's going to load. Yes, it's going to load. Ooh. Nice. One thing that I've been working on with our GIS tech is this is something that Mark, you mentioned earlier today, is having some sort of web-based application where you can toggle onto a specific building and you can see some historic photos that we have through our records or through other means such as like the State Historical Society, and then some key information, data construction, if the architect, what were some of the historical uses of the property. So this is more just an update as to something that we've been working on, kind of getting the base layer set up. So if there's any input as to what you want included on here, let me know. But ultimately, it's the goal of mine to include something like this for all the buildings downtown here, get it to a good spot, and post it online, probably in a similar page where our other GIS maps are.
Nice.
And then once our web-based application is worked out well, transferring that to the city's app to have an app-based application like this. So if you're walking downtown, that you can press a button, not press a certain building, and look at these old pictures, learn some relevant information about the building as you're walking along. So again, it's just an update about what myself and our GIS tech has been working on the last few weeks now, and hopefully as we progress through the winter, we can get all this information on here and give you a final product to review.
And what you could do is put those buildings that are gone. Because
That-
oftentimes they are parking lots.
Yes, and that was one thing I was asking Austin Ramchek, our GIS tech, is if there's a way we can use a different base map, a different aerial map here to highlight buildings that are no longer here, like Belkey, like the mall, if you want to see what the mall used to look like before, or even looking at our old Sandboard maps, finding images of.
That's what I was referencing earlier.
Yeah, finding images from like the 50s and 60s that we can upload. So yeah, that's definitely something.
I have postcards of those.
And
There's all those postcards at the university
okay.
of just all of that sort of thing.
Yeah, that's definitely something we've been looking at to see if there's a way or how we can maneuver that. I know for Belkey specifically, not the city, I'm trying to remember the gentleman who did this, but took interior images of the Belkey Lumber Building prior to it being demoed. Like, is there a way that we could incorporate more interior images like that into an application like this? So, but yeah, just more of an update to show you what's happening, and like I said, sometime this winter, hopefully we'll have a finished product. And
I think the first schoolhouse was right in the parking lot behind the library. In that parking lot, it sat. And then when they put the parking lot there, they moved it over to in the area where the band shell is.
okay.
And they didn't support it really well, and it literally blew over.
Oof.
And that was the end of that first school.
Oof.
Yeah. But it was right behind where the library is. Probably the corner where that corner parking lot was, there was a bowling alley. And across the street where there's that empty lot, there was a fire. And there was a tailor in there. And when you walked into there were two doors, and you walked up a metal stoop. Yeah, there were a few places downtown that had metal stoops. Yeah.
The tricky part is a lot of these photographs that we have on file are from mid-70s through the early 80s. We don't have a lot of photographs that are
The postcards.
before that, but
All the postcards have,
and
they're all in there.
I'm sure Tim would be a great resource with the
Yep.
Historical Society as well.
Yeah. They're at the university.
But okay.
Yeah.
And then the last update with the mural guidelines, that is something that I've been working on over the last few weeks of consolidating, looking how other communities have adopted mural guidelines and see how we can incorporate something like that for us. That was a directive that you as a commission gave to myself during our last mural review this summer. So expect sometime in the next few months we'll have an initial proposal before you all.
I think that the main thing with murals around the downtown is that they have some kind of theme. And it started with historical kinds of things, and obviously with Ruth Bader Ginsburg, it has come more up to contemporary times. But I think if you're thinking of an artist's body of work, it's usually consistent. It usually has a theme. You can tell that this is probably written by a particular person. Same thing, a painter has an oeuvre of work, but they're related in a way. And I think jumping all over the place with pictures, on walls, you can do a lot of very innovative things. You could on a wall, actually one of those walls where the post office used to be, you could do a reproduction of the post office, but you could also do kind of a modern painting of that old post office. I think there's a lot of ways to incorporate history into something that looks like it's from today, but it still speaks to the history aspect of it. So I think that one of the main ideas about the murals downtown is they have some kind of running theme through all of them. And you can say, oh, I understand how this connects to these other pictures. I understand how it connects to the people that are in that hallway by the library, you know, but it's still different. I think it means that they have to be more creative in that sense.
Yeah.
You know.
Okay. Chair, I'll refer it back to you.
All right, so
Agenda's exhausted, isn't it?
so.
There we just need to list a time.
All right, so moving on to number 8, I think this meeting stands adjourned at 6:37.
Perfect. Thank you much.
A video of this meeting is available for viewing on the city's website, stevenspoint.com/videos.